Hey folks, Rob here, bringing you another tutorial video. This is going to continue on with Chapter D. Not so much starter kits, these are more advanced concepts, but we're going to cover various extras, like I'm going to go over some errata that I made mistakes on, as well as covering things like Armored Assault, Aerosans, motorcycles, how that all fits into your gameplay. Alright, so let's get into that. So what we're going to cover today is, as I said, we're going to do some errata on part 2. These are mistakes I made or things I should have clarified a little better. And we're going to do Armored Assault and Vehicles as cover, as well as Convoy Impulse Movement, and then finally DD Tanks, Amphibians, and Aerosans. All right, so first of all, let's go over some errata. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the concept of delay. So we're going to use our target here. Let's just button them up for now, and we'll zoom in a bit. The concept of delay is to several reasons why you might want to do this. You want to get more MP in line of sight and increase your chances. You want to decrease the amount of MP in your opponent's sights, thereby increasing your chances of living. And if you want to change covered arc, turret covered arc, that kind of stuff. So there's several reasons why you want to use delay. Now, I've always been under the impression that when you enter a hex, you say, I'm going to spend this many points of delay. That is incorrect. There's two ways to use delay. First of all, you enter a hex, then you stop, and then you expend however many delay points you want, start up, and carry on with your actions. Or you could say, I'm here, for example, in A6, I want to enter B5. I'm going to expend 5 movement points from my total to enter that hex. So you can always expend more MP than the hex requires to act as a form of delay. So just remember that when your opponent stops in a hex and then announces delay, make sure that he's actually spent the MP to stop before he actually continues. So when it comes to vehicles like this with a red 12 movement, which means that you have a chance of stalling it, like this Panther, for example, every time he stops and starts, he has to make a die roll. And if he rolls a 10 through 12, he's going to be screwed. So just bear in mind how that works. You're probably going to typically want to spend delay entering a hex, or I should say spend extra MP entering a hex, rather than go through the process of delay, especially when you have red vehicles. The other one I made a mistake on was entering a hex. Now, I failed to read the whole chapter D section on this, and what it said was non-fully tracked vehicles will require all MPs to enter a hex. Fully tracked only requires half. So in the example I gave, when I entered the tiger into the woods, I ended up using all his movement points when in fact he only should have used 6. So I guess the takeaway from that is that you always want to be checking your terrain chart whenever you're dealing with terrain, especially if you're not familiar with it. So if you go down to woods, tracked is right here. This Z right here hidden away in the middle of the terrain chart means half of MP allotment. All right, so that's only available to fully tracked vehicles. All right, so that's the couple of mistakes I made, errata, if you want to call it that. Now, the other one I didn't really touch on, and that was a minimum move. So where this comes into play is that if you have a vehicle, so let's bring in an early war French tank. So here we have an FT-17, and you note that it's only got 5 move. Now, assuming that this tank in the French movement phase was stopped, you would have to spend 1 to start up. You'd have to make your stall die roll. It doesn't, he's not stalled, so he's fine. Now he only has 4 movement points left. However, again, if you refer to your terrain chart, we look at hills for a fully tracked vehicle, depending on the terrain, and H. Capital H is add 4 MP for each full level higher. So what that means is for an AFV, it's going to cost 5 move to enter a higher level. Therefore, he clearly cannot do it unless he uses a minimum move, in which case he can make it. He just remains in motion at the end of it. You're basically going to use up all your move to do what you have to do. You don't have to worry about bog. You don't have to worry about excessive speed breakdown. You're just making a minimum move, which means you can move 1 hex, and you essentially stay in motion. You haven't used up all of your movement points. There's some limitations like vehicle covered arc change. You can only do basically enter the hex. You can't pivot your vehicle covered arc. You can still pivot your turrets, just not your vehicle covered arc. When you get to things like one lane bridges or sunken lanes, clearly you're confined with the sunken lane. You got the sides of the hills on either side. You're not going to be able to do anything except move that one hex forward. All right, let's discuss vehicles as cover. Now, again, vehicles are, you got to be careful how you use them. When this vehicle here, let's put a motion counter on to say that it's been moving, just so for clarification purposes. If this unit, if this tiger had just moved into that location, it's considered moving for the rest of that fire phases. So in the defensive fire phase and advancing fire phase, you get no TEM protection from a vehicle. So when this unit decides to move after the tiger and this gun decides to open up, then you would not get the benefit of having this tiger. There's no negation of moving in open ground. There's no +1 TM for line of sight hindrance. You don't get any of that stuff because this vehicle is considered moving. The only time you get bonuses for this is if this vehicle had not moved that turn, if it's a wreck, and or if it's been abandoned. Now, I don't think I can do abandon on this thing here. Typically, you just put a abandoned counter on it. So again, unmanned vehicle, friendly or enemy, a friendly vehicle that has not moved that turn, or if it's a wreck, right? Those are the only cases when you're going to get a benefit of the vehicle as cover. Now, obviously the TM applies if the unit's inside the wreck hex. However, if you're just tracing fire through it, then it's a hindrance, all right? Now, there's, again, limitations to that. So say this tiger was in this location here in bypass of the woods building, and we have a unit here that wants to fire at the 658. They would have to pay the +1 line of sight hindrance because of the wreck. However, if you have a unit, let's put him over here, obviously, because this wreck is not going to be in his line of sight, it's not going to impact him at all. All right. Again, exceptions to the rule are when you have all right, now, again, other reasons why you might not get the benefit of a vehicle is obviously if it's a wreck and it's on fire. We have a burning wreck here. You're not going to get anything from this vehicle because obviously the troops are not going to be hanging around a burned vehicle. However, because burning vehicles give off smoke, you will have a line of sight hindrance based on the smoke level. Just remember that. If your vehicle is hull down or in a trench, I don't think I have any trenches here. If he's in an AT ditch, or maybe if he's hull down, you would not get the benefit of the vehicle for any kind of protection. Similarly, if he has, I don't have any waddies here or depressions, but if you're, because you're always at the base level, if the tank were to be in the bottom of the gully, clearly you would not get any kind of cover from it as well if you're in that depression hex. And then just to reinforce, anytime a case J applies, which if you look at your table, case J is the moving vehicle target, so J1 and 2. If any of these would ever apply for the duration of the fire phases, you will not get any benefit from a vehicle. Now let's discuss one of my favorite tactics is armored assault. So the way armored assault works is, in essence, because you're with a vehicle, it's not considered open ground, which negates FFMO. The vehicle itself gives you a +1 TM, which negates non-assault movement. So what effectively that means is that limited by the movement of the infantry accompanying unit and obviously your tank's movement points, you can move in conjunction and your net modifier against the infantry versus small arms would be 0. So this is a really handy way to approach entrenched positions by using armored assault. Now, limitations to this are the infantry and vehicle must start together in the same hex. So if the vehicle moves and then you join underneath it, you cannot engage in it. You must start together in the same hex. The vehicle cannot move any farther than the infantry accompanying it. So if I have 658, he only has 4 move. If I decide to CX him, then the vehicle only has 6 move. Now, in addition to that, he can pay his movement points for vehicle covered arc changes, or he can change his turret covered arc, things like that. Those starting, stopping, all that can be done using the vehicle's movement points. But in terms of forward movement, it's limited by the infantry. So in this case, we have 6 moves. So if I start up for 1 on the vehicle, let me go 2. Let's bring in a counter. The infantry is only expended 1. The tank is expended 2. Right, we move into here, so they each get 1 more. Now we've expended 2, and we can keep going until we've met our 6 movement bonus. Now, if, for example, we want to enter, say, F6, we've paid start for 1, 2, 3 for the vehicle, 2 for the infantry. We come here for 4 and 3. Now, because we've CX'd, we are allowed to enter this for a further 2. However, this vehicle here can only go another 2, assuming we stop, can only go another 2. So we spend 1 to change, doesn't is not counted in that 2. Then he can go here and then here for a total of 7. Notice he's not stopped, he's still considered in motion. If he wanted to stop, he would have had to stop back here. Right? Now, if this unit decided not to stop for whatever reason, they wanted to go to G7, this vehicle would actually have another movement point that he could have spent. So he could have gone there and he could have stopped. All right, that's the way armored assault works. Very handy tactic. It lets your units move across open ground with less of a chance of being impacted. 0 versus -2. Obviously, that's a huge difference. So just to reiterate, again, you must start with the AFV. The AFV cannot travel any farther than the infantry accompanying it. So if I give us a leader here, now we're going to have 8 move that the vehicle can spend, in addition to starting, stopping, changing vehicle covered arc. All right, so let's do that. We want to go to H5 as our ultimate destination. Let's move that out of the way. So we started for 1. Right, and we go 2 for the vehicle, 1 for the infantry, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the infantry spend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now the infantry can leave the safety of the vehicle. We can enter the building location for a total of 8. And the vehicle, and if he wanted to pay the bypass, that's fine. He's at 8. He can only go a maximum of you'd have to stop there because he cannot exceed the amount of movement points that the infantry spend. So he remains in motion in bypass. All right. If on the other hand we had abandoned the vehicle in G5, infantry continue on into H5 for those 2 extra move. He can now move a further 2 movement points. He can go 1, 2. He can go into bypass, stay in motion. He can go 1 and stop. But again, he's limited by how many movement points or how many factors the infantry spent. In terms of cover and continuation, just remember that if they move as a stack, they will always get the benefit of the TEM bonus from the vehicle, including elimination of MO. And again, NAM will cancel out by the terrain effect, so it's going to be 0 modifier versus the troops. They'll get that benefit for the remaining fire phases, defensive, defensive fire phase when it happens. Now there's weird cases like let's use a couple of Russians, probably not the best, but it's one of the few cases where it would actually apply. Again, same rules as armored assault that we demonstrated with the Germans, except this time we're going to use a human wave. So we declare the human wave, we put up our human wave counters. All right, let's move it to here. Let's put a German in this location here, and we're declaring a human wave. So again, we mark our units with a human wave. And because we're also using vehicles that have are radioless, so this T-34 variant with the flamethrower, if you look at the back, see the circled R, that always means that it's radioless. Radialist vehicles have to move. We're going to cover this in a little bit, but basically you move using impulse movement, and much like a human wave does. So it shares the same mechanics, just that they're vehicles. All right, so if in this case here, again, let's bring our stuff here. And we start off, so the vehicles, again, assuming they make their stall rolls, so we have one movement point so far for starting. Now we start our human wave direction. So we're this the first move. So the infantry have gone 1, vehicles have gone 2. Again, you know, I did that incorrectly. We actually move 1 at a time. So this is the first impulse. Once that first impulse is done, then defensive fire can happen against it. So in this case here, our German could decide to shoot at him. We're going to say he doesn't. He's going to wait for them to get in close. All right, now we go to our second impulse. So we're at 3 and 2. And then lastly, our last impulse. So this guy's going to be in bypass. The units will have to enter the woods because infantry cannot be in bypass. And we'll do our 2 move for that, as well as our extra move for paying bypass. So remember, with impulse movement, you're always paying the most expensive rate. So this unit here moved into open ground. This unit here, units moved into the woods, and the vehicle went into bypass and N10. So therefore, this open ground unit would have to pay the cost of the bypass as well. Alrighty, and then we do our continue on into combat. So the tank can be left, the unit can move in. This unit here can continue. We could bring that tank into bypass. This tank could continue to provide cover for its units, and so forth. All right, that's the way a human wave can work, which is one of the few cases of multiple stacks being able to cooperate in a mass armored assault. So it's got to be human wave, and that includes Banzai, but not any cavalry wave. And you must use platoon movement for any vehicle. So it's really confined to certain nationalities. You have to have armor that's typically radialess, or you choose to penalize yourself with platoon movement, which again we'll get into that, why you may not want to. You must have the capability of doing a human wave or a Banzai, and then you can use the armored assault to approach your objective. All right, so let's talk about wrecks. Now, in this case here, I brought in a burnt out wreck, but again, any vehicle that has a silhouette on the back of the white background has a wreck component to it. So if it's ever destroyed, then it is replaced with that. Remember, if it does not have a silhouette on the back, there is no wreck created from that location. Wrecks do not increase movement for infantry moving through it. So if I want to move to F6, I would just pay the 1 for the hex and then 3, total of 3 for the building. However, when it comes to vehicles, you're always going to add 1 extra movement point to the cost of moving through a wreck. And if you're coming through on a road, especially if you want to maintain road bonus, you would have to pay an additional 2. So if I come on the road, this hex here would cost me 3 movement points to bypass the wreck, another 3 for this one. So this would be a total of 7 to bypass 2 wrecks. If, on the other hand, I enter in from off-road, I would only have to pay 2, and then 2 for bypass, and another 1 for to carry on, depending what I want to do, obviously. the wreck itself for non-vehicle types, if it's burning, so let's put a blaze on the wreck. Because the wreck itself does not cause any hindrance, it does issue out smoke because it's on fire. Therefore, you have to pay an extra +1 for the smoke. So this infantry to move to F6 again would pay 1 to enter the hex, an extra 1 for the smoke, for a total of 4 to reach F6. Wrecks do not contribute to overstacking. Remember, overstacking penalties. The more of a thing you have in a location, the easier it is going to be to hit, cause some kind of effect. When it comes to TEM and LOS hindrance, the wreck is not considered, if it's on fire, to be a hindrance. It's the smoke itself, so you're not going to double stack. You're not going to get the wreck and the wreck blaze. You're just going to get the +2 for smoke. So I put a smoke counter to remind us that that's what the vehicle gives off. All right. So if this unit here in C7 wanted to dash to E6, because D6 is no longer open ground because of the smoke, it eliminates that. And because we're paying -1 for non-assault move, we have a +2 smoke, we would have a net +1 in this location if this gun wanted to shoot as they continue their dash, in addition to the dashing having +2 penalty for ordnance. Just remember, you're not going to double stack the wreck and a blaze if there's a blaze. All right, if there's no blaze, then you just get the +1 hindrance or TM for the wreck if you're in it or if you're moving behind it. Wrecks can be moved if you're in a train blaze. So say, for example, this vehicle was here and it was on fire, and in the course of the next advancing fire phase, the blaze got transferred to the train. Then the wreck would be gone and removed, and the hex itself would be on fire. So anytime a vehicle spreads its burning, it's burning to burnable terrain in its hex, then the vehicle wreck is going to be removed, and you're stuck with the blaze in the terrain, whether it's orchards, woods, brush, what have you, or grain. The minute it spreads to burnable terrain, the wreck is removed. It's basically no longer exists for the purposes of the game. You can also try and push a wreck out. Now, this is primarily only going to be used when you get to things like one-lane bridges or any kind of narrow terrain. Maybe there's a vehicle, let's put a vehicle in bypass here, say. We want to remove it so that we can continue to use this and maybe not use this open lane. If we have this Panther, for example, we look at our tonnage. Remember, for that, we look at our chapter H. All right, we're looking for we have a Tiger that's destroyed, so that's the VIE, and it's 57 tons. And then we have a Panther that is a VD model, which is only 45 tons. So clearly a Tiger cannot be pushed out of the way by a Panther. If, on the other hand, it's the Panther that is a wreck, because the Tiger outweighs the Panther can enter this hex, pay the applicable cost, so it would be 3 to enter it because he's on road, and then you can expend half of your remaining MP allotment, well, half of your MP allotment for a further 6, so that would bring it up to 9 movement points to push it out of the way. All right, so you can push this wreck out of the way, thereby freeing up a one-lane bridge. If you have enough move, barring all the penalties paid, you may be able to move 1 or 2 hexes, but typically this is going to be a 1 hex move, just enough to push an obstacle out of the way. And then lastly, in the case of scrounging, if you have a wreck and it's been scrounged, typically it's replaced with a burnt out wreck. You also have scrounge counters, which you can put on top of the wreck, basically indicating that there's nothing of use in the value. It still constitutes a wreck for line of sight hindrance and TM. However, it cannot be scrounged for any other kinds of small arms fire. Typically AFVs, this is early in Chapter D, carried enough small arms grenades, that kind of thing, to re-equip some units. And scrounge represents that. You're pulling the LMGs out of the coax and the BMG, You're going to try and dismount them for ground purpose. And once you do that, your vehicle becomes scrounged. So you can replace it with a burnt out wreck, or you do have the scrounged counters. All right, let's briefly talk about convoys and impulse movement. We already alluded to the impulse, but in essence, a convoy, as it kind of makes sense, it constitutes a line of vehicles without any gaps that are moving as a multi-hex stack. And again, you use the highest movement points. Typically, movement rate is doubled, especially on roads. So even though this vehicle here is considered crew exposed, normally they always get a half MP move bonus on roads. They would be having to pay a full, as would the trucks, as does the armored cars. So for these guys here, if we start back in this location, say they entered from off board, this is as far as I made it for whatever reason, and now they're going to carry on with their movement phase. They're all going to be considered in motion, so we don't have to worry about that. So then we start paying our cost. We move as an impulse, one stack at a time. So that cost us one. Again, we'll bring in our counter. All right, so that cost us one move. Now we want to pivot, so we may as well pivot this armored car here. So that's going to be one. This guy can stay, this guy can stay, this guy can pivot for one. So that's a total of two. Then we move our further for another point. Now, say we want to pivot here, we may as well, because we know we're going to come around this bend. We'll pay the one for the pivot. This truck will pivot. This one will stay straight, as will this one. So you see you're paying the most expensive rate for your vehicles. Right, so we come here, we want to pivot. That's going to be two. We're going to come here, pivot. That's going to be two. We're going to come here, and then so forth. You get the idea. Right? And obviously, you cannot exceed your movement points. You must use the worst penalty in all those cases. You pay the most expensive per hex. You are limited by the number of movement points in your smallest vehicle. The lowest number of movement points. Assuming our convoy was 5 vehicles long and this middle one was destroyed, eliminated, it would not leave a wreck, say, for example. In this case, we would have 2 separate convoys. We have this one here, so you must do them all separately, and you have this one here. All right, so typically you move your first one, your closest, your frontline one first, again moving your normal bonuses, and then once you're done with this stack, then you can move your second convoy. You cannot use reverse movement in convoy, and you cannot re-enter any previously occupied hex. All right. Now, when it comes to radialess AFV, so this works for early French models, and again, let's look at our Russian T-34s here. We have a circled R in the back, so anytime you see that on a counter, it means it's a radialess vehicle. Radialess vehicles must work in tandem, although they don't have to be set up like that. So if you're a defender with these Russian tanks, even though they are radialess, you can set them up in separate locations, which is all fine and well. However, when it comes to moving them, this is where you start paying penalties for being radialess. First of all, let's cover the impulse movement. Again, much like the convoy we just showed, it's the same idea. You pay the most expensive cost. So this vehicle wants to pay 2 to enter this location. This vehicle must pay 2 to enter open ground. If he wants to enter open ground for 1, this guy wants to enter bypass, this becomes 2 movement points. So you're always going to be paying the most expensive cost, as well as moving in impulse, which means you move one part of your multi-hex stack at a time, and then you move the next one. That's all considered one expenditure, okay? You obviously cannot use excessive speed breakdown or minimum move. So if you have a bunch of tanks with low MPs and you want to, say, climb up a hill, you cannot do that. You got to be adjacent to each other whenever possible, or an LOS. So you cannot be in bypass on other side of a woods hex. You must be within line of sight of each other. You all share the same status. So if one is in motion, then they all are. If one is stopped, then they all are. And when it comes to mechanical breakdowns, say we want to initiate our move, we only have to make 1 die roll for the entire platoon, which is a bit of a benefit. in this case, rather than rolling individually. When it comes to setting up in different locations, or you want to break away from platoon formation, you must take normal task checks. Normal task check is based on morale, which is for an AFV is typically the highest rated elite unit. For the Russians and Germans, it's 8s. That's the normal task check you have to make in order to move independently. So if you decide to set up spread out as a defender, when you want to move and adjust, you must be making normal task checks for all your vehicles. In this case, I failed. When you fail, you must stop whatever you're doing, and you're not you're basically expending the rest of your MP in that location. So it's it's a finicky rule. So you want to be careful when you're dealing with radialist vehicles when moving independently. If you have a high morale, you may want to do it more. If you have 7, say, then I don't think any elite has a 7. But if you have a lesser morale or inexperienced crews, you may want to reconsider acting independently. If you have a radialist vehicle and it's the only one in your order of battle, or the other ones have all been destroyed, then you no longer have to worry about normal task checks. You just carry on acting out what you normally want to do. All right, so let's look at motorcycles and bicycles. Now, all 3 types, so here we have bicycles, we have motorcycles, and we have motorcycle with sidecar attachments, all come in 3 sizes. The first 3 silhouette one can take a multi-man counter and several single-man counters. This would be half squad or a couple of single-man counters, and this would be 1 or 2 single-man counters. When it comes to things like support weapons, the only one that can carry support weapons would be sidecars. Right, and again, they're limited by size of the silhouette. So typically they must be dismantled, and they must fit within the requirement of the portage point capacity of the conveyance. So again, only sidecars can carry support weapons, and they must be dismantled. Bicycles have no inherent move and factors. They are moving points. They use movement factors, and it's based on the infantry using them. So if you have a squad, give ourselves a 447 here. If we decide to CX, then we'll get a total of 6 move that we can move, and if we have a leader, we can increase that as well. There's several benefits to the bicycle on road hex sides. So when it comes to moving down a road, we have our bicycle here. We have our CX squad. We get road bonuses because we can only travel on roads, provided, again, there's no shell holes. We'll cover that in a bit. You get your normal movement points. You don't have to worry about vehicle covered arc changes. You just move whatever your inherent rider's moving capacity is. You can move that distance. When it comes to things like shell holes or entrenchments or gaining elevation or dirt roads, when mud's in effect, for example, then you must pay increased costs to enter those hexes. It doesn't cost anything to dismount and mount a bicycle. All right, unlike a motorcycle, motorcycles always cost 1 to mount. In addition, you deduct 1/4 of your movement points available to the vehicle as in that as well. So if I want to mount up this motorcycle, my 28 move motorcycle goes down to 21, and therefore I only have 21 movement points left to go. So if I want to look at dismounting, then I have to make sure that I save another 7 plus 1 to dismount from the vehicle itself. So I'm only going to be able to move, in this case, maybe 13, 14 movement points worth. Then I'll have to spend time to stop and dismount. CX wouldn't apply. You're never subject to FFMO or NAM while you're riding a motorcycle. However, when it comes to dismounting, it's considered non-assault movement. So while you might be subject to FFMO if you're in an open ground, if you're not in that kind of location, then you're just subject to NAM. Motorcycles have no reverse movement. You are not subject to any kind of bog. Normally you're able to navigate through vehicle wreck. So if we have a vehicle wreck in this location, you would not have to pay anything to navigate around it. You do have to pay, however, excuse me, normal startup, stopping, and vehicle covered arc changes. So just like a vehicle, a motorcycle, even though it's got 28 move, must still pay those expenditures. Right, when it comes to things like overrun, only motorcycles with sidecars are available to do overrun attacks. You can drive through enemy positions on a motorcycle. You just cannot conduct an overrun unless you have a sidecar. In that case, you're using 1/4 of your rider's firepower as your attack. So in this case, we would have a 1 firepower attack as we transit through that hex. When it comes to doing a cycle rec check, basically anytime you encounter those kinds of terrains, a non-roadside hex side via an elevated road, double crest, or a abrupt elevation change, you have to make a rec check. And if you roll a 6, you're going to be bailed out. You're automatically broken again at the base level of the obstacle. Anytime you fire at a motorcycle and its riders, again, the conveyance cannot be attacked itself. It's only the riders that you're ever attacking. You're always going to have a -1 to hit. This is instead of the NAM moving and open cost. You're always going to have a -1, whether it's ordnance to hit or directly on the IFT. Any ordnance hits, once it hits, is resolved on the unarmed vehicle line of the IFT. And again, you're not subject to FFMO or NAM. The results of the IFT attack, so once your ordnance secures a hit, again, you roll on this vehicle line here, depending on whatever it is. So if we have a 75mm cannon, we're going to be firing on the 12 table. If we get any one of these results here, we start getting into effects. So if it's a KIA, you're eliminated along with the conveyance. If it's a kill, in this case K/3, then you suffer casualty reductions. So your full squad would go down to a half squad, as well as your conveyance would be reduced in size to match that. All right. Now, and when it comes to things like morale checks, in this case, anything between 4 and 9 would be a morale check. Then automatically you bail out if you fail it. Anytime you bail out, typically, as I said before, you will have to do morale checks. And finally, just to reiterate, bicycles and motorcycles do not have any wreck. So even if you get a HE attack causing flame, you basically vaporize the bike. There's no wreck, there's no flame, no nothing. All right, let's talk about duplex drive tanks and amphibians. And duplex drive basically infers that they have some kind of secondary propulsion. In this case, you can see the 2 superscript. That means that they're amphibious. This is the M4 duplex drive, and the concept is that the tank floats in the water and it has a screen. Now, typically, your crew commander would be on an elevated platform and able to see over the screen, and he directs the vehicle with a tiller while the driver's just making sure the propellers keep going and such. Very rudimentary in the process, and typically because of that functionality, for example, if we wanted to cross this river obstacle, typically these tanks do not lead the charge. You keep them off board because once you erect the screens, it's very cumbersome to move your vehicle further into the location. So typically the vehicle would approach while the enemy is being subdued to the shore edge there, or somewhere close by under cover. They would erect their screens, and then at some point they would move into the water where they start using their amphibious movement points to work their way through the water obstacle. Because these heavy screens were very fragile, any kind of HE or heat that actually hits it will render them unusable, which means you cannot swim your vehicle. Again, another reason why they were kept out of the line of fire until almost the last minute when they were launched into the fray. So in order to use your screens, this vehicle must be CE. You cannot have any kind of riders on it. You can still have passengers, but you just cannot have any kind of riders. And when it comes to moving through land, you want to stay to open ground because any kind of bypass you're not allowed to do. You're obviously not going to enter woods with your screens up. You're just going to trash them. So you're confined essentially to open ground movement at a rate of 1 per hex because, again, it's so slow and cumbersome to get where you're going. Entrance of a water obstacle always costs half of the land MP and half of your amphibious MP. So in this case, this tank, assuming it spent 1 here, 2 here, it would have 11 movement points left. It would have to spend 1 amphibious point as well as 7 land movement points to enter this hex. So this 2 would become a 9 as it enters its location, and you only have 1 amphibious point remaining for which you can then expend moving. For every half of your move, you lose 1 amphibious point, and for every amphibious point you lose half your move. Now, there are some vehicles which do have, like this LVT2, it does have a 3 superscript, which means you have 3 amphibious points, which means you can use up to 1/3 of your land and amphibious movement. Amphibious vehicles are always a very small target size when being shot at, and therefore they get the +2 to hit. You always have to worry about bog checks when you enter the land. So if we're coming this way, we want to enter this land, we're always going to have to do a bog check to enter that location. Again, given the soft shorelines, you may get bogged down. Soft ground, mud, whatever those other modifiers are, you do your bog check, assuming you pass, you can then enter this location. Once you're on land, that's when you drop your screens, and then you can carry on normally as per your tank. If you're ever shot at while you're in the water, you're treated as an unarmed vehicle on the IFT. So once ordnance has secured a hit, or in the case of small arms fire, MG fire, you fire directly on the IFT. You use the vehicle line again to based on the firepower that you're firing to determine the actual results. Any non-ordnance firepower is always going to be halved. Again, it's a very small target. If you ever get a KIA or roll a to kill die roll, then and you're successful, that means that the conveyance is sunk and everything with it is destroyed and removed as well. So again, very careful with your duplex drive tanks and your amphibians. And because typically water level is 1 level below the adjacent ground sometimes, unless flooded, it doesn't matter. You're still going to be no LOS hindrance. You can have as many as you want firing through it. You're never going to be hindered by LOS. The last point, just remember, because of the sensitivity of the screens, the owners have the option of keeping them off board until such point as you want to use them. So tactics wise, you want to make sure that your forward units are engaged with the enemy, if you have any, before you bring your fragile screens over, because if your screens get lost or ruined, then you're stuck on this side of the shore. All right, lastly, let's talk about Aerosans. Now, Aerosans came out in Hakkapali, the Finnish module. You might see this kind of use, but these tend to be rare. Again, they're symbolized by the white stripe behind the movement points, and it's basically a motorized sledge. Now, you're only allowed to use them, obviously, when ground snow or deep snow is in effect. You basically have a large propeller in the back, and maybe they're track-driven to maneuver them across the snow. And there's several limitations with them. There's several terrain types you cannot enter. You can see there. You can never use reverse or bypass movement. Again, they're just so cumbersome that you cannot do tight maneuvers around this woods, for example. You'd have to use the open hex, paying the applicable cost. When it comes to movement, you can only ever change 1 hex site at a time, again, at the applicable MP expenditure. So if you want to move into F3, this would be, for example, when we have our terrain chart, which I'm going to put up, you can see there. You have the cost of the open ground for 1, and then if you want to pivot, you can only pivot 1 hex set at a time. That would be for 2, 3, and so forth if you want to negotiate an obstacle. You also have to engage in rec check anytime you're using roads through things like, for example, this wooded location here. You'd have to do a rec check whenever you're using these kinds of orchard or brush roads, and you expend less than 3 MP in the process. So if you're going to expend 4 or more, I can remember about that delay point that you can always spend more MP than is required to enter a hex. So if I go 4 into this hex, normally it'd only be 1, I would not have to worry about doing a bog check. When it comes to towing, you're going to be adding 2 to the number to the movement points per hex traversed. Normally it's only 1 if you're towing a gun, but with an Aerosan it's going to be 2. You can carry passengers in addition to riders. So if we give our 458 a lift, we have 9 portage points available to the units. So typically a squad is going to be 10, so we cannot use that. However, if we give ourselves a half squad or a crew, and we want to have riders on top, maybe we'll get 2. We could have 1 as a passenger, and the other one would be a rider. But you're limited to 7 portage points for riders, in addition to whatever you can carry as a passenger. When it comes to straying, it follows the same rules as units. So the Aerosan, anytime it's away from things like a tree line or a road feature, he will have to make 2 die rolls. The first one is a movement die roll to see if he's subject to straying. And all that is, you roll 2 dice, you look at the colored die. If it's a 6, then you look at the white die and you consider the kind of unit, whether or not you're stealthy, whether you're elite, or stealthy, normal, or lax. And depending on the white die determines if you're one of those calibers, if you stray. Should you stray, so if we had rolled say a colored 6 and we had the white 5, that means our Aerosan would stray. We then make an actual straying die roll. So we make this roll. Doubles obviously is jitter fire. In this case, we're going to go direction 3. So starting from the top, you go 1, 2, 3, and for a distance of 5. Now, Aerosans, given the nature of the conveyance, are limited to 1 hex side. So if we give ourselves a different one like this here, we're in direction 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we would be heading due south. We would only be able to make 1 hex side change. So you don't have to worry about flipping it in reverse and heading back if you roll really poorly. All you're ever going to do is you're going to go up or down 1 hex side at a time. In this case, let's say we rolled a 4, so that's due south, so we do 1 hex bind. Oop, wrong one. We do 1 hex bind change. The next hex would be an obstacle, and therefore we would not be able to enter it. We would stop, and we basically become TI for the balance of the turn. All that entails. 2 other points. Aerosans also have the potential for winter camouflage. So remember, you get the +1 at 7 hex and beyond range for having winter camouflage. And when it comes to CC attacks versus an Aerosan, again, because you're bundled up in the back of the vehicle here, you're going to get an extra -1 against you. So you suffer an extra -1 attack against you if you're a passenger in an Aerosan. All right, so that was basically what I call extras for vehicle movements. Some of this is going to be very specific. You're only going to see it in certain scenarios. If you're not comfortable with Aerosans or Amphibians, obviously don't play those scenarios. But there's only one way to really get good at it, and that's to actually go through with it. Hopefully it's been of some use. Again, with the Errata, my intent is that when you guys point stuff out, I'm going to put in corrections so that I want to give out the best information possible. The next one we're going to cover is vehicle combat. So that's where we're going to look at things like overruns, hull down positions, terrain effects on anti-vehicle fire, that kind of thing. So see you guys in that video. Bye-bye.